They say time heals everything, but when André opened the envelope, hands trembling slightly, it felt more like the past had just broken into the present. Inside was a crisp wedding invitation cream cardstock, gold trim, embossed names Damien and Isabel. But it wasn't the names that made André stop breathing. It was the line beneath them. "We would be honored to have you as our groomsman." For a few seconds, everything around him blurred. The walls of his apartment, the dull hum of the fridge, even the quiet ticking clock on the bookshelf, all drowned in the echo of a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 7 years. Damien. Back in high school, Damien was everything to him. The best friend who laughed too loudly, stayed up on the phone until 2 a.m., who once told him, "I don't care what anyone thinks." But that was before André came out, before the silence, before he was suddenly invisible. And now this. He read the invitation again. Damien, now a successful businessman, was marrying a woman named Isabel, a lawyer, apparently, and he wanted André to stand by him on the most important day of his life. André's first instinct was to say no, politely, firmly. But as he set the invitation down on the table, his eyes rested on an old photograph taped behind the glass cabinet door. A picture of him and Damien, arms slung over each other's shoulders in their graduation robes. The kind of photo that still made his chest tighten. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was hope. But André whispered to himself, maybe this is his way of making peace. So he said yes. The rehearsal dinner was held at an upscale vineyard just outside the city. White lanterns swung gently in the evening breeze, and laughter floated over clinking glasses. André arrived in a dark button-down and tried his best to smile, but something felt off. Old friends he hadn't seen in years greeted him with vague nods or overly cheerful exclamations like, "Long time, no see, and you haven't changed a bit." One of Damien's colleagues even nudged another guest and said, "Just loud enough. That must be the token gay friend." André chuckled softly to himself and excused it as ignorance. Maybe they didn't mean harm. Maybe people were just awkward. But as the evening wore on, those stares, those glances that lingered too long, eyes that moved from his shoes to his pin on the lapel, they began to weigh on him. He wasn't imagining it. He knew what it was like to be tolerated, but not accepted. Back in his hotel room that night, he sat on the edge of the bed, tie loosened, shoes already kicked off. For a long time, he stared at the ceiling, not crying, not angry, just hollow. He had come here thinking it meant something, that perhaps this was Damien trying to reconnect, to acknowledge what had been broken between them. But now, it felt like he had been invited as decoration, a performance of inclusion. Still, as he turned off the lamp and pulled the blanket over himself, a thought stayed with him like the dim light from the hallway seeping through the doorframe. "At least they invited me," he whispered. "Maybe that means something's changed." But even as sleep overtook him, the tightness in his chest remained. If you've ever returned to a place that once broke your heart, would you choose forgiveness or the Truth Watch next part, only on Heart Story? The morning of the wedding arrived with a thin layer of fog rolling over the hills. The vineyard looked serene under the muted sky, as if unaware of the tension quietly building beneath its calm surface. André dressed early. He took extra time adjusting his suit jacket, smoothing the fabric, checking the angle of the small LGBT pin he wore on his lapel. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was a quiet declaration of presence. He had learned over time to exist without apology. When Damien texted asking for help finding a specific tie, André offered without hesitation. Maybe it was his need to be useful, or maybe he just wanted to believe still that this day wasn't a complete fraud. He made his way to the changing rooms on the second floor of the guest house, footsteps soft against the wooden floor. As he approached, he heard voices, laughter, sharp and private cutting through the half-closed door. At first, he paused out of courtesy, then a name caught his ear. "André." He froze. Inside, Damien and Julianne were speaking freely, unaware of how thin the door was, or who stood behind it. "That guy," Julianne chuckled. "Is he trans or just ambiguous? I can't tell." Damien's voice followed, low and mocking. "Honestly, I have no clue. I invited him just to look progressive. Isabel's site is full of lawyers. They eat up that kind of stuff." Julianne laughed again. "If she ever finds out what really happened back in school, this whole wedding's going to implode," Damien answered with a tone that sent chills through André's spine. "Well, that's why she won't, as far as she knows. He's just an old classmate with a sad crush. Harmless." André stood still, breath caught somewhere between his ribs and throat. He hadn't expected praise or fanfare, but this cruelty masked as camaraderie. This reduction of his presence to a political performance was something else entirely. The word token from the night before returned to him, but now with context sharpened like glass. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't a friend. He was a prop. He turned and walked away before they noticed. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something more difficult to swallow: humiliation. And yet, as he reached the staircase, he steadied himself on the railing, drawing in a long breath that anchored him back to his core. He would not leave quietly, not this time. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a silent reminder of the tools he carried unknowingly. When he checked the screen, a red icon on his voice memo app blinked. Without intention, he had activated it during the walk to the room. The recording had captured every word. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply saved the file. As he walked back to his room, the fog outside began to lift, just slightly. Sunlight crept over the horizon, spilling gold across the windows. Inside, André stood by the mirror, still in his suit. He stared at his reflection, not to check his appearance, but to confront the man who refused to be invisible again. They had laughed at him. They had underestimated him. And now he held something they didn't know existed. The only question left was, what would he do with it? Back in his hotel room, André sat still for a long time. The recording was safe, almost too safe. It lay in his phone like a silent witness, pulsing beneath the glass screen. He replayed the audio just once, not to confirm what he heard, but to confront the reality of what it meant. He had always assumed Damien had simply drifted away after high school. That silence was just the cost of growing apart. But now he knew it had been intentional, cold, calculated. The words weren't just cruel, they were engineered to erase him. He stared at the bouquet of wedding favors on the nightstand, glossy and pristine. None of this had been real. Not the invitation, not the handshake at dinner, not the hollow smiles. He considered leaving, packing his suit, deleting the recording, disappearing before anyone could ask questions, letting Damien marry his illusion and letting the past rot quietly beneath pressed tuxedos and champagne toasts. But then, just outside his door, he heard footsteps. Soft, purposeful. Through the narrow crack of the doorframe, he saw Isabel walk past, smiling, radiant, adjusting her veil with gentle fingers. She looked happy, a woman in love, walking into a future she had no idea was built on secrets. André felt something shift. Not anger, not revenge, but a refusal to let the lie stand any longer. He didn't know Isabel, not really, but no one deserved to build their life on a foundation of mockery. Not when the man she trusted most had weaponized someone's identity for social currency. He grabbed his phone, tucked it into his inner pocket, and stepped out into the hallway. Moments later, he found Lucy, Isabel's cousin, whom he'd met briefly the day before. She was standing by the reception tent, folding programs with practiced precision. He approached with a calm he didn't quite feel. "Lucy," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, eyes warm. "Of course." If someone was about to walk into a marriage with someone who didn't really respect them, would they deserve to know the truth before the vows? Lucy blinked, then set the stack of programs down. If that someone is Isabel, she said gently, then yes, she'd want the truth. She's always said silence is the worst kind of betrayal. André nodded. She looked at him a moment longer, as if reading a deeper story beneath his expression. Then she asked, "Do you want me to help?" He hesitated, then spoke with quiet certainty. "I just need access to the sound system when it's my turn to speak." Lucy didn't ask why. She simply nodded and walked off toward the technician station near the back of the tent. Back in his room, André rehearsed nothing. There was no script, no speech, only the truth in a voice recording that stripped every mask from Damien's carefully curated face. He placed a single backup file onto a USB stick and slipped it into the lining of his jacket, just in case. As he zipped up his suit and adjusted the pin on his lapel, his fingers steadied. For the first time in a long time, he felt grounded. This was no longer about past pain or buried friendships. It was about the present, about refusing to be complicit. He would not make a scene, he would not shout. He would stand, speak, and let the truth echo in the space where lies had once danced. Outside, the sky cleared. The sun broke fully through the clouds, scattering gold over the vineyard like a quiet blessing. The ceremony was about to begin. The ceremony unfolded like a dream choreographed months in advance. Rows of chairs flanked the aisle, wrapped in white ribbon and lavender. A string quartet played softly as guests settled into their seats. The vineyard bathed in sunlight, as if even the weather had been ordered to comply. Damien stood near the altar, sharp in his tailored tuxedo, wearing the same self-assured smile André remembered from high school, the kind that once said, "I'm in control." Isabel joined him, graceful in her ivory dress, fingers interlaced with his, eyes shining with the kind of trust that could break a person once shattered. André stood among the groomsmen, his heartbeat steady. Every breath felt deliberate, every blink anchored in purpose. He hadn't come to destroy. He had come to reveal. The vows began with poetry and promises. Damien's voice was smooth, confident, as he spoke of forever, of honor, of truth. Each word dripped with irony, and André could barely keep from glancing at the phone in his pocket. When the officiant invited the best man to share a few words, André stepped forward. The aisle fell into silence. Birds overhead stilled their song, as if the vineyard, too, was holding its breath. He reached the front and turned to face the crowd, not reading from notes, not clearing his throat. He looked at Damien, he looked at Isabel, then he spoke, not loudly, but with the kind of calm that silenced even internal noise. "Thank you for allowing me to stand here today. I know weddings are sacred, built on honesty, respect, and shared history." A pause. "I came here thinking I was being included, that maybe, after years of silence, something had changed between us." Damien shifted slightly, eyebrows drawn in faint confusion. André continued, "But the truth is, I heard something yesterday. Not meant for my ears, perhaps, but it matters." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Lucy, standing discreetly at the back, gave a small nod. She had already synced the Bluetooth connection to the vineyard's speaker system. As André tapped the screen, the soft static of a recording filled the air. Then voices, familiar ones. Julienne's mocking laugh, Damien's voice, cruel and clear. "Honestly, I have no clue. I invited him just to look progressive. As far as she knows, he's just an old classmate with a sad crush. Harmless. If she ever finds out what really happened back in school..." A collective gasp rippled through the seated guests. André didn't move. He let the recording play, uninterrupted until the final chuckle faded into static. Then silence. A silence so thick it muffled even the breeze. Isabel turned slowly to Damien. Her face, once flushed with joy, was now pale, stricken. Her hand slipped from his. Damien's jaw clenched. He reached forward. "That's not what I meant." But it was too late. He lunged toward André, trying to snatch the phone, but André stepped back calmly, placing it in his jacket. The damage had already been done, and everyone had heard it. From the second row, Lucy leaned toward Isabel and whispered just loud enough, "There's something else you need to know." André stepped aside, giving her space. The officiant looked paralyzed, as if unsure whether to continue or call security. But no one moved. The guests remained glued to their seats, eyes darting between the bride, the groom, and the friend who had just shattered the illusion. Damien opened his mouth to speak, but for once, he had nothing left to hide behind. The moment had arrived, and there would be no salvaging it. The vineyard had never known silence like this. All eyes turned toward Damien, whose mask of charm and control had fallen away completely. His fingers curled and uncurled at his sides, searching for words that would not come. His suit, once pristine, now seemed to hang heavy on him, as if the truth had weight. Isabel didn't speak right away. She just stood there, absorbing the words still echoing from the speakers, the whispers around her, and the voice inside her rising louder than any violin or vow. She turned to Damien, her voice quiet but steady. "What happened in high school?" "Damien." He opened his mouth, closed it. Lucy didn't wait. "He dated André," she said simply. "Back when no one knew, when it was dangerous to be honest. But when someone found out," Damien panicked. He denied it, spread rumors, made André the target so he could walk away clean. André didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of the memory pressed down on all of them. The hallway whispers. The slurs scratched into lockers. The isolation he carried for 2 years before disappearing after graduation. Now, standing under a wedding arch surrounded by flowers and falsehoods, the truth had found its way back. Isabel stepped back. One step, then another. She looked at Damien, her fiancé, the man who promised her truth and saw not just betrayal, but cowardice, Mom. "So that's what you call maturity?" she asked, her voice now rising. Damien tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away, her expression unreadable. With graceful finality, she lifted the bouquet from her arms and placed it gently on the altar. Then she turned, walking down the aisle alone. The crowd didn't move, not until she was halfway gone. Lucy followed, whispering something close to her ear. Isabel nodded, and they disappeared into the light. André remained still. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He simply walked out, upright, leaving behind the ruins of a performance built on lies. The air outside was cool, the sky wide and open, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he needed to shrink himself to fit anyone's comfort. Weeks passed. No press release came from Damien, no salvaged image, no new date for the wedding. But then, a quiet headline made its way across local networks. New LGBTQ+ legal education initiative launches. The founder, Isabel. The program focused on legal rights, workplace protections, and anti-discrimination efforts in public institutions. And in the photograph accompanying the announcement, standing beside her in a crisp black suit with a small rainbow pin, was André. Reporters asked why she had chosen him to lead the training series. Isabel's response was calm, direct. "Because he stood when it was easier to stay silent. Because he reminded me that integrity is not what we say when others watch, but what we defend when they don't." Then, just as the interview ended, the journalist asked what truly made her walk away from the wedding that day. Isabel hesitated for a second. Then she said, "It wasn't just what Damien said about André. It was what he once said about my little sister. 2 years ago, during a dinner party, he called her the family shame after finding out she was gay. He didn't know I heard." She smiled faintly. Turns out, André wasn't the only one he underestimated. André never asked to be the symbol of anything. But that day, walking into a room full of strangers who finally saw him not as a shadow from someone else's past, but as a voice, a presence, a truth, they called him what he had always been enough. Have you ever been invited back into a world that once rejected you, only to realize you were never the one who needed to change? If this story moved you, follow for more true-to-heart stories only on Heart Story.